Live from the Opera House, it's Storytime with your host, Ben Whiting.
Hello, friends, and welcome to Live from the City Opera House, it's Storytime. I'm your host, Ben Whiting, and every week on this show, we're going to have a great story read by a special guest and then have a fun activity that you can participate in right from home. I'm going to tell you the supplies you need for today's activity in a little bit, but if you would like to know the supplies we're going to be using on future activities and future episodes, you can visit us online or on social media to download our activity worksheets. And those will include the supplies you need for every activity, past, present, and future. Now, we all know when we have friends who help us out, it's important to say thank you. And we want to thank some friends who've made this show possible today. Traverse City Area Public Schools, Newtons Road, Tattle, the Traverse City Opera House, and our series underwriting sponsor, Bell Tire. Thank you so much for your support and contributions because this show would not be possible without you. And now for today's book. Do you know what a parade is? A parade is a public procession that usually happens around a special day or event. An example of this would be the annual Macy's Day Parade that happens every year in New York City. Now, when you think about it, a parade is kind of like a public theater performance. There's singing, there's dancing, there's floats, and there are giant balloons. Which brings us to the title of today's book, Balloons Over Broadway. Now, when you have a parade, it takes a very special creative mind to put everything together and to organize it. A mind like that of a creative director. And our guest reader today is artistic director Phil Murphy. And another person who has a creative mind is the hero of today's book, Tony, who grew up to become an accomplished puppeteer and create the giant balloons they use in the Macy's Day Parade. Now, before Tony grew up, he was already a creative problem solver, solving problems like his chores, by finding creative solutions that combined his imagination with science. And for today's activity, we're going to take a page out of Tony's book and make our very own homemade pulleys. And we want to challenge you to find some problems you can solve around your house with the pulleys that you make. What you'll need for today's activity include a small plastic container, scissors, string, a magnet, and some paper clips. Now, if you don't have these supplies readily available, that's okay. Go ahead and watch today's episode, and then you can tune back in later on demand when you have all the supplies ready so you can make your pulleys from home. And with that, take it away, Mr. Murphy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Storytime. My name is Phil Murphy. I'm the artistic manager of the Old Town Playhouse. I don't know how many of you have had an opportunity to perform to this point in time, but I've had the great fortune to have performed for the last 55 years in the theater. It's a wonderful, wonderful place to be, where dreams and imagination run rampant, the kind of things that I know you as young folks all tend to enjoy. I hope that if you ever have an opportunity and a desire to seek out greater entertainment and performance, that you might come to the Old Town Playhouse, certainly as a spectator, but more importantly, we have the Old Town Playhouse Young Company, where you can learn all about the wonderful aspects of theater that are available to you. Today, I'm going to read this wonderful book, Balloons Over Broadway, by Melissa Sweet. Before I go into this wonderful story about the balloons of the Macy's Day Parade, I'd like to tell you that when I was just a young person, probably between the ages of about 7 and 10, much like yourselves, I lived in New York City, and I had the great fortune to go to the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade almost every year. It was a marvelous time in New York. Occasionally there'd be snow, but mostly it was that wonderful feeling you got at Christmas time or in the holidays from between Thanksgiving and Christmas, where you could see all the wonderful windows on Fifth Avenue. It was just a beautiful time, and it was great to go to the Macy's Day Parade. With that, I'll tell you the story, the true story of the puppeteer of the Macy's Parade. Balloons Over Broadway by Melissa Sweet, written and illustrated. Anthony Tony Frederick Sarge, from 1880 to 1942, was the master puppeteer and the person who first brought the Macy's balloons to all of us. Every little movement has a meaning of its own, according to Tony Sarge. From the time he was a little boy, Tony Sarge loved to figure out how to make things move. He once said he became a marionette man when he was only 6 years old. His father had asked him to feed their chickens at 6:30 in the morning every day. Well, Tony had an idea. What if he could feed the chickens without leaving his bed? He rigged up some pulleys and ran rope from the chicken coop door to his bedroom. That night, he spread chicken feed outside the chicken coop door. The next morning, Tony pulled on the rope and the door to the chicken coop opened. The chickens ate their breakfast and Tony stayed snug in his bed. And his dad, so impressed, never made Tony do another chore. When Tony grew up, he moved to London, where he discovered that no one was making marionettes for kids anymore. So out of wood, cloth, and strings, Tony began to make puppets. He figured out ways to make his marionettes' movement so lifelike that they performed as if they were real actors. Word soon spread about Tony's amazing marionettes. When Tony moved to New York City, the Tony Sarge marionettes began performing on Broadway. In the heart of New York City, in Herald Square, was the biggest store on earth, R.H. Macy's department store. Macy's had heard about Tony's puppets and asked him to design a puppet parade for the store's holiday windows. So Tony made new puppets based on storybook characters and then attached them to gears and pulleys to make them move. In Macy's Wondertown windows, Tony's mechanical marionettes danced across the stage as if by magic. All day long, they performed to shoppers jostling for a better look. But Macy's had an even bigger job in store for Tony. Many of the people working at Macy's were immigrants. And as the holidays approached, they missed their own holiday traditions of music and dancing in the streets. Macy's agreed to put on a parade for their employees, and they hired Tony to help. Tony, too, was an immigrant, so he loved the idea of creating a parade based on street carnivals from all over the world. He made costumes and built horse-drawn floats, and Macy's even arranged to bring in bears, elephants, and camels from the Central Park Zoo. The animals joined hundreds of Macy's employees on Thanksgiving Day, 1924, winding their way from Harlem to Herald Square. It was a dazzling parade. In fact, Macy's first parade was such a success that they decided to have one every year on Thanksgiving Day to celebrate America's own holiday. Each year, the parade grew. But when Macy's brought in lions and tigers, in addition to the bears, elephants, and camels, the animals roared and growled and frightened the children. Tony, can you think of something spectacular? R.H. Macy said. Okay, said Tony. Macy's asked Tony to replace the animals. Tony hoped to replace the animals with some kind of puppets. but his marionettes were less than 3 feet tall. He would have to make much larger puppets in order for them to be seen in the parade. And how could he make them strong enough to hold up in bad weather, yet light enough to move up and down the streets? Tony knew of a company in Ohio that made blimps out of rubber, the perfect material for any weather. When he called the company and showed them his sketches, they agreed to make what Tony wanted. Still, how would Tony make his big puppets move? Then Tony had an idea from an Indonesian rod puppet in his toy collection. On Thanksgiving Day, Tony's creatures, some as high as 16 feet, spilled into the streets, and the crowds cheered wildly. Part puppet, part balloon, the air-filled rubber bags wobbled down the avenues, propped up by wooden sticks. But now the sidewalks were so packed with people that only those in the first few rows could really see the parade. Tony realized his puppets would have to be even bigger and higher off the ground. And though the sticks helped to steer the puppets, they were stiff and heavy. Tony wanted his balloons to articulate, to move and gesture, more like puppets. But how? With a marionette, the controls are above and the puppet hangs down. But what if the controls were below and the puppet could rise up? During the next year, Tony set his new idea into motion. This time, he asked the company in Ohio to make balloons out of rubberized silk, as strong as rubber, but lighter than rubber alone. Most important, Tony ordered the balloons to be filled not just with air, but with helium too. Since helium is lighter than air, it would make the balloons rise. Once the puppets were completed, they were deflated and shipped back to Tony in New York. Tony did not know if everything would go as planned. What if the balloons are filled with too much helium? What if one hits a sharp object? Will they fit under the L, the elevated train track? It was still dark on Thanksgiving morning when Tony filled the balloons with helium, tethering them down with sandbags. By 1 p.m., the sidewalks were packed with people ready for the parade. Then one by one, Tony cut the lines to the sandbags. Let's have a parade! And the magnificent upside-down marionettes rose up to the skies. Nodding and waving to the crowds below, they sailed past Central Park. They sallied down Broadway. They shimmied and swayed through the canyons of New York City. High above the crowds, they flounced in the afternoon, wind pulling the rope handlers this way and that. Yet with every heave-ho, the balloons gestured and articulated like wild puppets, and the crowd screamed for more. After the balloons were eased under the L, they ended in front of Macy's at Tony's Wondertown windows. It was a parade New Yorkers would never forget. And from that day on, every Thanksgiving morning, crowds have lined the sidewalks of New York City to see what new balloons would rise to the skies for Macy's famous parade. Tony Sarge, the puppeteer who loved to figure out how to make things move, had set the stage with a little rigging for a puppet to be anything anyone could imagine it to be. Wow, what a wonderful story. As I said, I had the great pleasure of experiencing that live. And it helped to make me desirous of being in the theater. And shortly after those times, I had an opportunity. I took it, and I've been there ever since. I hope you can find something in Tony that's inspiring, that teaches you about marionettes and puppeting. You know, I also experienced when I was young, the Muppets, early. Kermit was the only character I really remember from that time. But it was a wonderful experience. And as I say, it led me to be in the theater. Thanks. I hope you enjoyed the story today. Glad to meet you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Murphy, for that fantastic reading. And now it's time to take what we heard and put it into action. And to do that, we have a very special guest, Mr. Keith Fortin, a teacher from Central High School, and he's here to walk us through today's activity. Mr. Fortin, how about you introduce yourself and get us started?
My name is Keith Fortin, and I teach at Central High School. And I have the great privilege to teach many students a subject called mechanics. And much of what the story that you just heard involves mechanics. So I brought in some things to show, some things to make, and ways to hopefully get you to imagine and be creative in certain tasks dealing with mechanics. So my first problem here is I have a small tractor and I have Bear here. And let's pretend for a second that Bear is one of the balloons that you heard about in the story. And in order to get the balloon to where the parade is, you've got to get the balloon up on the tractor so it can be moved to the start of the parade. Now, unfortunately, the balloon is really heavy. So how do we get something that's really heavy up into the air on something then that can move it? And the answer is mechanics. And so what I'm going to show you here is with some household items, how you can start to build simple machines that fall in the category of mechanics. And these simple machines then allow us to move very, very heavy things with reasonable effort that you and I can do, our pulls and our pushes. So you're going to need some string. I have a piece of string here that I've cut. You're going to need, for example, a paper clip that maybe you can very carefully take and just open it up so you kind of make it look like a fish hook. And I'm going to take the string. I'm going to make a small loop in the end, very carefully, like so. And then I'm going to slip the paper clip through so it hangs like that. Okay? Now, at home, if you have a small pole, maybe a broomstick, maybe a stick that you find that's fairly straight from outside, I've got this one suspended between two chairs. And I'm going to loop my string over and down. So I think you see I've got an end that I pull on this end, and then an end here with the paper clip that I'm holding that goes the other way when I pull. Okay? Now, I've taken our balloon, Bear is setting in for our balloon. I've taken a little rubber band and putting around here so I don't have to hurt Bear when I put the paper clip on. But I'm going to take the paper clip and clip it on the rubber band behind the bear. Now again, this is our balloon, and somehow we want to lift this balloon up. It's really heavy. We want to lift it up high enough to get the tractor underneath and take it to the parade. So I'm going to pull on this end, which then in turn will lift our balloon up to a height that now we can set the balloon down like so, undo it, and now the balloon can go to the parade. But we've got a problem here. And here's the problem. if you look carefully at where the string loops over the wood, it just doesn't move very well. It kind of sticks. It's really hard to pull over the wood right here. So how can we make that string move over the pole easier so we're not wasting our effort as we lift? And the answer to that is a pulley. A pulley is a type of simple machine, or that can be used to make a simple machine to lift very, very heavy objects. I brought in some pulleys to show. These are pulleys that you would buy at the store. This one is very, very large. It has a wheel. The wheel is called a sheave. Some people pronounce it sheave. And then it has a pin that runs through the middle that the sheave or the wheel rotates on. And it rotates very, very easily. Here's a smaller one that you can buy at like a hardware store. Much smaller, but it's the same thing. It has a wheel and a pin that allows the wheel to rotate. Now, it's kind of hard to ask mom and dad to go out and buy a pulley. So is there a way that we can make our own? And the answer is yes. One way that you can make really, really simple is get a piece of cardboard tubing, cut the cardboard tubing, and then cut small cuts in the end, and then fold the ends back, like so. And the tubing that I have here is just from an old roll of paper towel. Slide this over your stick, and then put the string over the top, and you'll see that now the string rolls on our paper towel pulley as I move back and forth. Are there other things that you could find around the house? Boy, just in looking around our house, I found some really great things that we could use for pulleys. This, for example, is a spool that you would use for ribbon that you would use to wrap a Christmas present or a birthday present. Again, ask mom or dad if they have any of these around. Hopefully there's not a lot of ribbon left on it that you could take off. This then slides really nice on my stick. And you can see again, it rolls very smoothly, very nicely. I found some other ribbon connectors, other ribbon holders, if you want to call them. These actually have 4 grooves in them. So really you could say these have 4 sheaves on them. And they could be used to make pulleys and pulley systems as well. So let's see how my homemade pulley works here. So I'm going to take our balloon, I'm going to connect it back on the rubber band, and I'm going to put my string back on the pulley. And sure enough, lifting the balloon or lifting the bear is much easier. Now, one thing I want you to notice here is that it's about the amount that I pull down is about the same as the amount that I pull up. That's a 1-to-1 advantage. In other words, I pull down one length, the bear goes up an equal length. Now, what if there was something heavier than the balloon? Okay, let's pretend for a second that you had to lift something that was much heavier. Let's say you had to lift this monster truck. And that monster truck has to go to the monster truck race. So somehow I need to lift this monster truck, which is much heavier, up on to the tractor or the trailer. The trailer is going to take it to the monster truck race. Well, what we need to do now is redesign our pulley system here to allow us to lift something that is very, very heavy with less effort. And what I'm going to do is something kind of sneaky here. I'm going to take my ribbon holder, my homemade pulley, and I'm going to slide a wire through it, like this, or a piece of string. That would work equally as well. And I'm going to take and then connect this to my monster truck, the item or the bear or whatever I want to lift, like so. But this time, I'm going to connect my paper clip to the pole, like this. So it's anchored not at the bottom, but now it's anchored up on top. And I'm going to slide my rope, my string, through the pulley at the bottom. Okay, so now, if I can get this straightened around. You have something that looks like this. Now, let me connect it to our truck. If I can get that to stay. There we go. And now, when I lift, you'll notice that the effort that I take to lift this is much easier than it was if I had to lift it straight up. Let me hold this tighter. The effort that it takes to lift now is much easier than what it was to lift straight up. But what's the trade-off? I don't know if you can tell, but the trade-off is I have to lift twice as much string. Twice as much. To get twice as much length of string to allow me to lift that easier. So is there a way then that you can design pulley systems? Yeah, pulley systems can be really elaborate. They can be up and down and up and down again. And now you can see that I can lift like so, okay? So pulleys allow us to lift very heavy systems, very heavy objects. They are part of a study called Simple Machines, and Simple Machines is part of the study of mechanics. So use your imagination, be creative, see if you can make a pulley system or a mechanic system to lift something like a balloon, a monster truck, or maybe some small cars. So boys and girls, it was a pleasure to be here with you. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned something, and be creative.
Mr. Forden, thank you so much for walking us through today's activity. That was absolutely awesome and wonderful. And we also want to say thank you once again to Mr. Murphy for that great reading of today's story, and also thank you to our sponsors for making this show possible. But most of all, we want to thank you for tuning in. The show would not be possible if you didn't keep watching. But we're not done yet, because we want to see what you created with today's activity. So take a photograph of your pulley system and attach it with your name, age, and a description of your project, and email it to info@tcaps.net. And one of you will be winning a free copy of today's book signed by our guest reader and yours truly. And if you enjoyed today's show, please tune in every Wednesday at 9 a.m. for future episodes. And don't forget, you can see all of our past episodes at tcaps247.com. Again, that's www.tcaps247.com. My name is Ben Whiting, and until next time, stay safe, have fun, and keep learning.